Hello and welcome everyone to the Varsity Tutors StarCourse series, where today we are live from one of the world's favorite museums, and definitely my favorite, the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, where we've got a behind-the-scenes tour of the world of dinosaurs and the perfect tour guide. Matt Carrano is the Curator of Dinosauria at the Smithsonian, which really means he gets to travel around the world finding and researching dinosaur fossils, and he's going to tell us all about all the amazing things that he learned. Now, before I turn it over to Matt, just a couple things you guys should know about. One, we're going to learn a little bit maybe about how dinosaurs communicated, but we're also going to show them how we do it. There's a chat box and a polling station to the right of the screen. Matt's going to ask you some questions to find out what you know and want to know about dinosaurs, so you can answer them there. And if you've got any questions whatsoever, while we've got one of the world's most renowned paleontologists here with us, fire away with all your questions in that chat box throughout the class. And in the last 10 minutes or so, I'll interview him with your questions to get some answers. Also, we want to impress dinosaurs with our technology. We've got camera phones. Make sure you've got one ready because there's all kinds of great opportunities to take pictures throughout today's tour. And we'll make sure we have a special spot for you guys to get a picture that we'd love for you to post on social media after the class so all your friends can see that you had this amazing backstage pass to the Smithsonian. So with all that said, make sure to keep it really interactive. Make sure to enjoy this behind the scenes tour plus all the great information. Let me turn it over to your teacher for today, Matt Carrano from the Smithsonian.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm really excited to be here. As you heard, I'm the Curator of Dinosauria here at the National Museum of Natural History. I've been here for almost 20 years, but I have been interested in dinosaurs since I was 7. And so I'm really happy to be here in our fairly new fossil hall. As you can imagine, it was a highlight of my life so far to participate in the design and creation of this exhibit. Where we hope that you can come and see it in person, but I also hope that this will be kind of a special extra way to see it. What I'm going to do is use this exhibit as a way to talk about dinosaurs. We're going to go through just about everything from the very beginning of dinosaur appearance and evolution all the way to their extinction. So there's a lot you can imagine in between those two topics. And we're going to move from part to part in this exhibit. Before that, though, I do have a few questions I'd like to ask you just to get a sense of what you think and what you might know. So let's start with that. Question number 1, and you can type your answers, send them in. What makes dinosaurs unique among reptiles? Dinosaurs are reptiles, but they're a special kind. We've got some choices there on the screen. I see some pretty interesting suggestions and some good answers. Good. Excellent, excellent. Next question, which of the following is the closest living relative of dinosaurs? Some of these look more like dinosaurs, but which one is the closest living relative of dinosaurs? I see a lot of you probably already know the answer based on what I'm seeing. Very good, all right. And which of these animals was the first to evolve on Earth? Good answers. All right. Well, we're going to get to all of this, and we're going to get to more. And so we'll find out in some detail what the story is with dinosaurs. All right. So let's start here. Why am I standing here? I'm standing in front of an exhibit case that shows you animals from the Triassic period, about 200 million years ago. These animals were alive on Earth. And I want to use this as a starting point because dinosaurs first evolved in the Triassic period. I want to take a step back, though, and ask the question, what's a dinosaur? It's a word that you probably hear all the time. It's a very popular topic now, and it has a lot of meanings. Sometimes it's sort of applied to really any prehistoric animal. Sometimes you hear it applied to just anything that's really old. You know, oh, that building's a real dinosaur. They should tear it down and build a new one. To a scientist, though, a dinosaur is something very specific. It's a very particular kind of animal. And dinosaurs are unique in that they have features that are not seen in other animals. So we can identify a dinosaur when we see these features. For example, there are very special structures in the neck, in the arm, in the hip that are present in dinosaurs that are not present in other animals. Some of these are a little bit subtle or obscure, but I'll give you an example of one that you might be able to notice the next time you're looking at a dinosaur skeleton. If you think about the hip socket, like our hip socket, most animals, It's kind of like a cup, and the leg bone fits into that cup pretty neatly. In a dinosaur, that cup has a big hole in it, a very big hole in it, almost like a window. If you're standing on one side of a dinosaur and you look into the hip, you can see right through to the other side. That's a really unusual thing, and other reptiles don't have that. What that tells us is that dinosaurs, that feature was evolved in the first dinosaur, and it was inherited by all the dinosaurs that descended from it. And so dinosaurs can be discriminated from other animals by the presence of these things. So that helps us say this is a dinosaur or this isn't a dinosaur. But it doesn't really connect dinosaurs to anything. How do we do that? Well, then we turn to the other side of the coin and we say, well, what is it that dinosaurs have in common? What are things that dinosaurs share with other features? One example of something like that is if you look at the jaw of a dinosaur, there's a hole in it. Most animals, including us, it's just a solid piece of bone. But that hole is very interesting because it's also present in birds, alligators, pterosaurs, and pterodactyls. And that's a clue that those are all related to each other. So that gives us a sense of what are more like dinosaurs than other reptiles. Turtles don't have this, lizards and snakes don't have it. That whole process that I just described very, very generally of finding things that are unique and finding things that are in common is really how scientists classify animals, plants, and life on Earth. By finding things that are unique, we can say this is a special group of animals or a special group of plants. By finding things that are shared, we can say, and they're related to this other group. And if we do that over and over and over, what we end up with is an enormous tree of life that shows how everything on Earth is related to everything else, all the way back to the very first living thing that ever existed. So it's a really powerful process, a powerful tool. You can imagine with tens of millions of species, it can be a little tedious at times. But it's the thing that underpins everything else we do in biology and evolution. So that gives us a framework. We know what a dinosaur is. We know what it's related to. Let's talk about the actual story of dinosaurs. How did they get here and why and how? This, as I said, these are Triassic animals behind us. Most of the things that you are seeing behind me aren't dinosaurs. And that's because the Triassic, when dinosaurs first evolved, was not a time when dinosaurs were sort of in charge. They were not the most important animals. They appeared in a very interesting time. The Triassic followed the largest extinction in the history of the Earth, the end Permian extinction, 251 million years ago. It was the most devastating mass extinction that we know of. 70% of everything on land and 90% of everything in the oceans went extinct. All right, that's a catastrophe. But what that means is that the Triassic is a time when the survivors are evolving. They are evolving into new forms, sometimes filling spaces that were left by extinct organisms. Sometimes wholly new things were invented. Innovations of evolution took place. So the Triassic is filled with really interesting animals. Some of these animals, like this big phytosaur behind me, might look familiar. It looks pretty much like a crocodile, but it's not a crocodile at all. It's an entirely different kind of reptile that evolved to do what crocodiles now do today. Over here, we have a lizard-like animal called the Trilophosaur, not a lizard, but doing things that were probably similar to what lizards do today. These are animals that were only alive in the Triassic. They came and went in this period of kind of a ride of evolution. Also, though, a lot of important modern-day animals evolved. This helmet down here in the corner is a shell of one of the earliest turtles. In addition, we see some of the earliest frogs, some of the earliest true lizards, and some of the earliest mammals and their relatives. Mammals, in fact, appeared just a little bit after the first dinosaurs. So our own history is almost as long as the history of the dinosaurs. So where are the dinosaurs? Well, there's one dinosaur in this case, right here, and this is Eoraptor. Eoraptor is a 230 million year old dinosaur from Argentina, one of the earliest dinosaurs that we know of. And it really shows you what some of the first dinosaurs were like. They weren't very big. They weren't that impressive. And they were bipeds. They walked on two legs, an important innovation for dinosaurs. They freed up their hands. So it's a little predatory animal running around next to much bigger predatory animals. And it took some time for dinosaurs to diversify and to turn into the things that we're really familiar with. So these first dinosaurs were just one part of the Triassic landscape. You could visit many places in the Triassic. If you took a safari in time and you went to the Triassic, you might not notice a dinosaur. And in fact, if you went to the wrong place, you might not find one at all. So they were just there in the corners of the world trying to make their way where many things were larger and more important at the time. So that's the story of dinosaurs in the Triassic. But I think we all want to get to the really exciting animals that we know. And I want to talk more about dinosaurs as living things. And so we're going to move to the next time period, the Jurassic period. So I hope you'll come with me and we'll take a stroll over to the next exhibit. So welcome to the Jurassic. Here we are standing now representing time about 145, 150 million years ago. This is a long time after the Triassic. Now, the Jurassic has already been steaming along for a while before we get to these animals, and a bunch of important stuff happens in the Jurassic that really set dinosaurs apart and made them the animals that we really think of them when we think of the word dinosaur. But what really happened, I think, was time. Time moved along, the world kept changing, evolution did its thing. And animals evolved into other animals. Dinosaurs started to slowly diversify. And a couple things happened. They evolved to be, some of them, pretty big. They did this by growing pretty quickly. So they essentially could outcompete some other animals in terms of being big animals. But the other thing that happened didn't really have to do with dinosaurs. The other thing that happened was there was another extinction at the end of the Triassic period. This was not as big or catastrophic as the one at the end of the Permian, but it still had some pretty important effects. And one of them was that a lot of the big animals of the Triassic just didn't make it. Big phytosaurs, other big predators on the land did not make it. And so the early Jurassic, the landscapes didn't have these animals anymore. And so you had a combination of dinosaurs evolving new features and other animals getting hit pretty hard by an extinction. And so in the Jurassic, dinosaurs were really set to really diversify and dominate. And that's exactly what happened. They started to get larger. You always had small dinosaurs, but then you started to have animals by the beginning of the Jurassic, maybe weighing a ton or even a little more. By the end of the Jurassic, maybe weighing 50 or 60 or 70 tons. And they were global. They were everywhere. Every land environment that we know of in the Jurassic has dinosaur fossils in it. That is absolutely not the case in the Triassic. The other thing is that there were very few competitors that they had to worry about. If you were a dinosaur and you ate plants, there was almost nothing as big as you that you had to worry about. Everything that you competed with you was tiny. Insects, lizards, small mammals, things like that. If you were a predator, maybe there are a few big crocodiles around, but that's about it. And so you really had the run of the place if you were a large animal. In fact, if you weighed more than about 20 pounds, there was very little around to compete with you. So this is how you get a world that you think of, a dinosaur world, right? This is what we're sort of seeing behind me. And so it's worth asking, okay, the world is really, these environments are dominated by dinosaurs. What are they like as animals? I want to talk about, dinosaurs were living, breathing things. And so, they had to contend with the same problems that other living things do. Now, the downside as a paleontologist, of course, is that you have to do a lot of your work from only the skeleton. So things that you might want to know about an animal that are not recorded in the bones are very, very hard to understand, of course. Occasionally you get lucky with a really, really spectacular fossil, but it's very rare. So, but the skeleton is our main thing. So let's think about it. Way up high behind me is a giant sauropod dinosaur, Diplodocus. Next to me here is an ornithopod dinosaur, plant eater called Camptosaurus. And here is a predator, Allosaurus. These were all dinosaurs that lived together, and they all shared features of their biology. The skeletons of these animals show that their limbs were upright, not out to the side like many other reptiles. They are actually, for their size, relatively slender animals. They're not super bulky. And then if we look a little more closely, so I'm just talking about the design of the animal. If we look a little more closely at the animal skeleton, we can actually see a little bit of evidence for how they breathed. That doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, but birds are a really good case study. Modern birds, unlike you, right, or me, where we breathe in and breathe out, our ribs do some movement and our lungs are expanding and contracting. In birds, it's a little bit different. The lungs of birds are pretty stiff. They don't actually expand and contract very much. But what they have are extra air sacs attached to the lungs that do the inflating and deflating. And this gives them a lot more flow of air. And it's important. Birds are pretty high energy animals, so they can get a lot more gas exchange out of this. And these air sacs are absolutely everywhere, from the abdomen to the neck. They actually grow into the skeleton of a bird. So bird skeletons have pockets and openings in them where air sacs grow and stay. And in fact, if we look at many dinosaur skeletons, particularly things like Diplodocus and Allosaurus, we see the exact same thing. We see pockets in the same places that we see them in birds. And so it's a reasonable hypothesis that this is an air sac system, that dinosaurs have something like what birds have, which is pretty interesting. Maybe they're high energy animals. If we go even more into the bones, we can take those bones, we can slice them open, we can look under a microscope, we can start to do actually geochemical analysis of bones at the sort of sub-microscopic level. And we can see, for example, that most dinosaurs probably had stable body temperatures. The bones at the tip of the tail or the toes were the same temperature as the middle of the body, which is another indication they may have had a relatively high metabolism, high energy body system. Let's break this down, though. These are sort of systems that dinosaurs may have had. Let's just look at a few aspects of dinosaur biology. Let's talk about like how they moved, what we would say locomotion in dinosaurs. That's one of the areas where we actually have a better handle on things, because of course the skeleton is really important to that. The shape and size of bones is really important to how animals move. Dinosaur legs, dinosaur arms give us a lot of clues. They're proportioned very similarly to the same bones in mammals. And so there's some hint there that the movement they're doing might be relatively similar to what a mammal does. Further than that, on the bones themselves are marks, ridges, scars, pockets that are the places where muscles were attached. So we can actually start to reconstruct which muscles were present and where they were and think about how they acted. Dinosaurs seem to have been very, very good at walking and running. That was kind of their big thing. We don't see a lot of specialties in dinosaurs, the way you might think of kind of the weirder mammals of the world. We don't see a lot of that in dinosaurs. One reason might be that they have a pretty strange way of building their ankle. So if you think about your own feet, you can do a lot of things with your feet. These are my hands, but you can move your feet around just like I'm moving my wrists. They're very flexible. In fact, you may have like turned your ankle, for example. That flexibility is also a weakness at times. Dinosaur ankles only move like this. They're a hinge. They're very stable. It helps them stand up straight. But it means that a lot of things they just aren't very good at. If you were a primate and you wanted to climb a tree with your feet, it would be great to be able to do that. If a dinosaur had to climb a tree, it would have to scrabble up like a goat or something like that. The same reason dinosaurs probably weren't very good at digging. They just didn't have the ability for that kind of movement. So dinosaurs are great at some kinds of motion, but not so good at others. The other big thing we like to talk about with dinosaurs is what did they eat? Here's the head of Camptosaurus. This is a plant eater. Typically plant eaters, you imagine slightly smaller heads than predators, but we can get into obviously more detail. The teeth and jaws are the most important things. Predatory dinosaurs, of course, have relatively pointy teeth. Very common morphology or shape to those teeth in predatory dinosaurs. They are curved backward into the mouth. They have serrations on them like a knife, and they're fairly thin. So they're very much like a knife blade, great for holding onto something, grabbing something, and keeping it in the mouth. Plant-eating dinosaurs had a whole range of tooth shapes. Some of them are shaped like little pencils or spoons. Some of them are shaped like leaves or chisels. And that's a clue that there's a huge variety of plants that they're eating. The jaws give us an idea of how strong their bite was. If we really wanted to get down into the details, we would look at dinosaur poop or maybe the stomach contents. That's about the only way we can know the very specifics of what a dinosaur eats. But unfortunately, that's pretty rare. Really, we have, again, the skeleton. And so we can tend to say this dinosaur ate meat, this dinosaur ate plants, this dinosaur ate maybe tougher, more fibrous plants, but we often don't know the species. The last part of biology I want to talk about is how dinosaurs reproduced and grew. To this side of me here, you can see Allosaurus, and on the ground near the tail is a nest of eggs. This is a great place to talk about the fact that all dinosaurs lay eggs. Now, some dinosaurs laid eggs just like birds. They had hard shells. You could crack them open. But other dinosaurs laid eggs with more leathery shells, like crocodiles or turtles. The young would have to sort of tear open to get out. We have this nest here because we actually have found nests of Allosaurus with eggshell and hundreds of bones of tiny Allosaurus babies. And like other dinosaurs, the babies of Allosaurus are remarkably small compared to the size of the adults. The Allosaurus could reach 20 or 30 feet. A baby Allosaurus you could hold in your hand. The egg of an Allosaurus, as you can see, is pretty small. The largest dinosaurs like Diplodocus would have had an egg no bigger than a football. And so these animals are hatching incredibly small. How did they get to be an animal that might weigh 20, 30, 40 tons? For a long time, we thought that dinosaurs grew very slowly. And so dinosaurs, maybe it took them 80 years to become full-sized. But in fact, inside the bones, there was a clue. If we slice open a dinosaur bone, there are rings, like tree rings, laid down every year, a new layer of bone, and we can count them. And we can see how much growth took place. And by doing that, we see that dinosaurs actually grew incredibly quickly, as fast as we do or as fast as birds do. They were full-size in 20 years. This Diplodocus actually got bigger than this. This might be a teenage Diplodocus, if you can imagine that. And so a dinosaur would go from this to 20 or 30 tons or 80 tons in 20 or 25 years. So imagine that growth rate. And in fact, some of them had teenage years where they had a growth spurt. So you can even imagine the amount of food that that takes. If you were a herbivore, you'd be eating all day. If you were a predator, you'd be ravenous, I think, as a teenage dinosaur. So it's pretty remarkable that the world was being run by these things that just needed this much energy all the time. All right, so that I think is going to wrap it up for dinosaur biology for this part here in the Jurassic. I want to get on to talk about dinosaurs and the different kinds of dinosaurs. And the better place to do that is going to be in the Cretaceous, the next time period. So we're going to take a stroll over there. Now, it's a bit of a long walk, so we have a couple more questions for you as you follow me. Few more million years, you're almost here. All right, so that was 80 million years in, I don't know, 90 seconds, not too bad. I'm standing here in front of a case that represents about 75 million years ago in the later part of the Cretaceous period. And these dinosaurs behind me are all from Western Canada, probably contemporaries of one another. What's interesting, of course, is to show you that there's a lot of diversity here. Many major types of dinosaurs living in one environment. And this was really true in the Jurassic, true in the Cretaceous, in the way that it wasn't true in the Triassic. So let's get into talking about different kinds of dinosaurs. Scientists generally will classify dinosaurs into two major groups. One of those groups we call Saurischia, or the lizard-hipped dinosaurs, is a sort of old-fashioned way of talking about it. Saurischians include all the predatory dinosaurs, all the theropods, things like Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, as well as all the long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs, sauropods, like the Diplodocus we saw, or Brachiosaurus. And these are animals that don't look that similar to one another, but they do share things in common. One thing that they share in common is actually they have a pretty big thumb with a claw on it, usually. And most other dinosaurs don't have this. Most other animals, unlike ourselves, don't really have very prominent thumbs. The other group we would call ornithischians, or the bird-hipped dinosaurs. Don't let the name fool you. They're not really very closely related to birds. And ornithischians include a really interesting variety. So this big armored dinosaur behind me, an ankylosaur, Euoplocephalus, basically a big armored tank of a dinosaur. And its cousins, the stegosaurs, are in this group. Small dome-headed plant eaters called pachycephalosaurs. Over here, the horned dinosaurs like this animal, Centrosaurus, and its relative you're probably familiar with, Triceratops. Behind it, a duck-billed dinosaur called Procerolophus, that's an ornithopod. all of those things together make up the ornithischians. And they are pretty interesting because they share something that no other animal has at all, which is they actually, evolution for them invented a new bone. They have a bone at the end of their jaw that is a completely new structure that no other animal has. So it's very easy to identify an ornithischian. So those are kind of the major groups of dinosaurs, the way we kind of broadly think about them. And I should have pointed out here, Gorgosaurus, one of our Tyrannosaurs, or predatory dinosaur with very characteristic teeth. But how many kinds are there really? I mean, there's a lot of species of ankylosaurs or horned dinosaurs, etc. It's actually a difficult number to answer, to give you just like a number. Scientists have named, 2,500 species of dinosaurs. Is that a reasonable estimate? No, it's nowhere near how many dinosaurs there probably were. And it's important to sort of think about why that might be. So first of all, we've only been looking for dinosaurs for a couple of hundred years. It's not very long. And right now, we are finding more dinosaurs than we ever have before. We're looking in more places of the world. There are more people looking. And every year we find like dozens of new species of dinosaurs. So we're actually finding them faster. So there's no way we're getting to the end of finding new dinosaurs. In addition, the ones we find often are pretty different from the ones we have, which is another good clue that we're just beginning really to see all of the dinosaur diversity. But, underneath all of that, which is sort of more about us and how we are finding them, we're never going to find all the dinosaurs that ever existed. It's not possible. And for that, you have to kind of think about what it takes to be a fossil and a fossil in a museum. A lot of things have to go right in order for that to happen. If you're a dinosaur and you die, well, you can't get eaten. You don't want to decompose entirely and turn into nutrients because then you're gone. Your bones have to survive. They have to be buried. And that usually happens in certain environments where things are being buried, places where sediment is building up. That's where things get buried. If you live on a mountaintop, sediment is washing off the mountain. So you can't really get to be a fossil very easily. So in a lot of environments, maybe no dinosaurs became fossils. In some environments, they had the chance. I don't know what chance, 1 every 10,000, 1 of every million. We don't know, not very many. And then let's say you did all that, right? And you got to be a fossil. Now you have to last for 70 or 80 or 100 million years in the ground, not get, covered with, turned into molten lava or, all sorts of ways that rocks get destroyed. You have to survive. And you have to survive until a bunch of humans are walking around the surface of the earth looking for you, and you have to be right there for them to find you. It's no good if you're 200 meters below ground. Doesn't work. So that's a pretty long list of things that have to happen. And it's why the dinosaurs we have are probably just a tiny fraction of the dinosaurs that ever existed. And there were probably a lot of dinosaurs. A standard species of dinosaur, this Euoplocephalus here, this ankylosaur, lived on Earth as a species for a few 100,000 years, maybe 1 million years, probably not much longer. It either evolved into something else or it went extinct, and that was it. And that is the normal pattern of how things work. When dinosaurs were around for their 160 million years, they were evolving into new kinds, and many of them were going extinct along the way. Scientists call that background extinction, the extinction that is always happening. It's like just the kind of background noise when you're listening to music. It's just always there. But that over 160 million years is enough for a lot of dinosaurs to come and go, and why it's probable that there are many tens of thousands or more species of dinosaurs that were alive on the Earth. That is how evolution often works. Slowly, little steps, little changes, but over long periods of time. And I have a great example here of how that can actually add up to something really significant. So we're just going to walk just a little bit this way and look at another part of this Cretaceous exhibit, the origin of birds. So the story of the origin of birds is one that scientists have struggled over for probably 150 years. The oldest or the first discovered fossil bird, Archaeopteryx, right here, was found just around the time Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. And for a long period afterward, we had very little to work with besides Archaeopteryx. This thing with feathers but yet has teeth and a long tail the way a dinosaur does. Is it a dinosaur? Is it not? Scientists argued very energetically over where birds came from. Did they really come from dinosaurs? Did they come from another group of reptiles that we don't know that much about yet? And this went on and on until about the 1990s, when in China, the first discoveries were made of feathered dinosaurs. And by feathered dinosaurs, I mean a dinosaur that has feathers or some other feather-like structures on them. And there's two examples behind me. This is a dinosaur called Caudipteryx, something like an animal called Oviraptor, which you might be familiar with. And Caudipteryx, if you look at the skeleton, is a dinosaur. But on the hands and on the tail, there are feathers. And these are feathers with a structure to them that look feather-like. And then the body is covered with things that are more filamentous, more kind of hair-like, but still a little feathery. And then we have animals like this animal, Sinosauropteryx, another dinosaur, essentially dinosaur skeleton with, in this case, fuzzier feathers around it. We started to find more and more and more of these dinosaurs, skeletons of things that in other ways we would never imagine were birds, but which had something we would have otherwise said, it's a bird, it has feathers, it has to be a bird. And over the next 20 and 30 years, we found tons of fossils that fill in all of these spaces. So we have an incredibly detailed picture of how this process happened. And it turns out that almost everything that we would say is a bird feature shows up first in a dinosaur. And it's really just the last couple of things that evolution adds to that mix that makes a bird. You know, they finally sort of get beaks and they finally lose their tails. And then you get something like this Confuciusornis at the far end, which I think for all purposes is very much just a bird. And so this story now, we have just step by step, we can look at things like an Allosaurus and find bird features in an Allosaurus and walk our way through this tiny process of animals just evolving for the moment, a new feature that works for them. These feathers are probably for display or for insulation or something, but they're certainly not for flying. And then later, you add a couple more pieces to the puzzle, and then you end up turning one function into another. Maybe they were long enough to glide or jump out of a tree, and now you have a wing, and now you have a bird. And so it's a great illustration of how the little steps of evolution can end up with a pretty monumental shift over time. A bird is something so distinctive, and yet I think if you were around in the Cretaceous, you would have a hard time being sure if you were looking at a bird or a feathered dinosaur. All right, so I want to just take one last stop. We're going to go to just the very end, the edge of the Cretaceous, the last dinosaurs. We're going to take another stroll around the corner, and I'll show you one last part of our exhibit. All right, I suppose you recognize the characters here to my right, your left, Tyrannosaurus rex and its meal of the moment, Triceratops. But also, I want you to look in the other direction, because this entire display is showing you things, animals from one particular time and place, one ancient environment. In the western part of the US, 66 million years ago, right at the end of the Cretaceous period. And what you can see is, of course, many kinds of dinosaurs, this big duck-billed dinosaur and ornithopod called Edmontosaurus, but also lots of other animals are here that I want to talk about. We have this crocodile-like animal, a Champsosaur. We have lizards and mammals. We, of course, have tons of plants. The big slabs here on the far side of the exhibit are filled with leaves of plants. And it allows us to really put together a very detailed picture of this ecosystem. And of course, dinosaurs are the most prominent things, the most dramatic things. But if you were to sort of step back into this time, I think you would find that almost everything else was a little bit more familiar to you. You had plants with flowers, as well as evergreens, things you would maybe recognize or at least look familiar. And then the small animals would be things that you would not bat an eye at. There would be frogs and salamanders. There would be all sorts of fishes. There would be snakes, turtles, crocodilians. There would be birds. There would be all sorts of insects you might recognize. And then there would be these giant dinosaurs. They are composing an ecosystem that in every way functioned the way our ecosystems function today. And I think you would find, again, particularly familiar until something like a T-Rex showed up. So just like any day on Earth today, right? The sun is shining back in the Mesozoic, and that energy is being captured by plants. It's being turned into carbohydrates. Herbivorous animals are coming and eating those plants. Carnivorous animals are eating those animals, and then everybody dies, and as decomposers turn you back into nutrients, and then the next generation of plants grows, and that's how the energy is cycling through this system. That's exactly what's going on. The main difference is that the world today, the big things we like to look at, whether they eat meat or plants, tend to be mammals. Lions, giraffes, rhinos, elephants, things like that. Swap those out for dinosaurs, and you don't have that different a system. This would have been an environment maybe a little bit like a bayou, but we could find dinosaurs in environments that were dry and desert-like, that were riverbanks, that were near the ocean, all sorts of things. So I think what I want you to sort of think about is that this isn't that unfamiliar. This is not an alien world, right? This is our world. There's just a few different actors in the roles that we have come to know. So these are really, I mean, these are vibrant ecosystems. They're rich with life, very diverse. What happened? It all gets shut down pretty fast. What happened is, and we've learned a lot about this since about 1980 or 81, an asteroid hit the Earth. 66 million years ago, it hit in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, right in the Gulf of Mexico. And that impact set off a chain of catastrophic events that were global in scope and ultimately led to a mass extinction. Not as big as the mass extinction at the end of the Permian, but pretty big. Certainly a competitively bad mass extinction in the list of mass extinctions. And what happens is, of course, most dinosaurs go extinct, but lots of other things go extinct. In the oceans, everything from plankton to octopus like ammonites to marine reptiles. They get wiped out or hit really hard. On land, it's not just dinosaurs, but different kinds of birds and mammals disappear. Other kinds of reptiles vanish. Some of the plants go out. I mean, it's a really comprehensive extinction event. Is it, why was it this bad, right? I mean, I think there's a couple things that are going on. You know, it's not every day that a 6-mile wide rock hits the Earth, which is, a couple of billion nuclear bombs going off, basically. But it hit somewhere where the rocks it hit were actually full of things like sulfur. And those rocks got vaporized into the atmosphere. So in addition to all the dust and soot and things that went into the atmosphere, you had sulfur compounds, which meant acid rain. So the oceans got acidic as well. So you have this like chain of problems that get just snowballed. And so all over the Earth, on the other side from where this impact is happening, things are terrible for everything. You also have other things going on that maybe made this worse than it otherwise would have been. In India, there was a massive volcanic eruption happening where thousands of square miles were being covered by lava. And that's just adding terrible chemicals and compounds to the atmosphere. So already you probably had things going bad. You can think of sort of like the Earth had a really bad hangover and then somebody hit it in the head with a rock. So it was a lot worse than it could have otherwise been. The thing that's so interesting about this extinction, though, is, of course, that it doesn't kill everything. That's the really interesting thing about all mass extinctions. They're terrible events. They're fairly compressed. They hit hard, but things survive. And who survives is always an interesting story and an interesting puzzle. What we would call the selectivity of this extinction is still kind of a mystery for scientists. Dinosaurs went extinct, and feathered dinosaurs went extinct, except birds didn't go extinct. And some birds survived and some birds didn't. Why did those birds survive? Why did not those? Why did some mammals survive and other mammals didn't? It's difficult to really answer those questions across the board. Maybe some animals had something in their biology that made them a little less susceptible to this terrible time. Maybe they had some behaviors. Maybe they burrowed, they could hibernate, they could kind of get out of the way for a long enough time that they could then come out and survive. We don't really fully know the answer. But we do understand is that the after effects of this extinction were a pretty big deal. Obviously, we talk about the disappearance of dinosaurs, but the disappearance of the big marine reptiles is just as dramatic in the oceans. And dinosaurs doing what they did in these ecosystems, now suddenly there wasn't anything doing those things anymore. So what happens? Well, there's no big herbivores, there's no big carnivores. Who fills the gap? Mammals fill the gap. Mammal evolution takes off after this extinction, and mammals take on these roles, the roles that we know of in the world today. So some of those mammals were primates after the extinction, and some of those primates were our ancestors. So our own story connects very directly to the story of the dinosaurs and their extinction, and it's very hard to pull them apart. I mean, I think our own beginnings are very closely tied to this really important event. So that's all of the main topics that I want to talk to you about today. I am going to do a little bit of a wrap up for you. So I'm just going to have a seat over here and you'll join me in a moment. Welcome back. That was a long walk through a couple of 100 million years, so I thought I'd sit down. You're welcome to sit at home as well. I thought I'd sit here next to Charles Darwin and one of his finches just for inspiration. So let's just kind of very quickly recap what we talked about today in the story of dinosaurs. As it's been said, big things have small beginnings, and that's very true of dinosaurs. The earliest dinosaurs were in many ways unremarkable animals. You probably wouldn't have bet a lot on them to go the distance when you first see them in the Triassic. But there's a couple of events that help them along in their own evolution, put them in a position to be the dominant herbivores and carnivores on the planet for 160 million years. They were a global phenomenon. Their biology, though, I think should, well, as amazing as they are, as huge as they are, as inspiring as they can be, their biology fundamentally is animal biology. So I encourage you to think of them as animals, as living, breathing things that did the things we all do, right? Breathe and sleep and eat and poop and make babies and do all that other stuff. That's what dinosaurs did. And seeing how they did it is really informative, I think, as a scientist, to look at how another group of animals do the things that we, of course, do and find important too. And of course, the conclusion of most of dinosaur story is the fact that there was a mass extinction driven by an asteroid impact that ended this really enormously successful history. But I would also encourage you to remember that, of course, because birds are dinosaurs, dinosaurs are not actually extinct. The ones we think of as like pretty cool and exciting, okay, I will give you that they're extinct, but actually there's more birds on Earth today than there are mammals. So you are in a world that's actually still a dinosaur world, though we like to think of mammals as the ones in charge. And then finally, it's worth sort of thinking about dinosaurs and their story and our own story and the world we live in. I often wonder, would we be here if dinosaurs hadn't had a mass extinction? Would primates have had the story they had, and would we be here talking about dinosaurs? Maybe not.
Some great questions to ponder, and you guys have had a lot of amazing questions for Matt to ponder. So those who have been to a lot of these StarCourses before know how this works. We're going to get to one of the stars of today's show here in just a second. Matt's going to wander over to get us a spot to take a picture. So make sure you guys have your cameras ready, and we'll be set up for all that. And then keep your questions coming. We're going to get as many answers as we can here in just a little bit. So keep your questions coming. Get those cameras out, because we're going to go back full screen to Matt here in just a second. And Matt, before we do that, one of my favorite interactions everyone had during one of our long walks is they were asking that question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I think we've got the answer, but call it out specifically for us, and then we'll make sure we get that picture.
Yeah, so here we are, Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. The chicken and the egg question, I think we can answer that question. Since we know birds are dinosaurs and we know dinosaurs laid eggs, the eggs were there before the birds. So glad to put that to rest after all these years of wondering.
Awesome. Thank you so much. But I was amazed when you told me that. That was one of the more mind-blowing experiences. So I've got a big smile on my face for all of those you have too. We're going to go full screen back to this amazing scene out there so you guys can get those pictures, and then we'll make sure we get some questions answered. All right, we'll have the official handle so you can tag Varsity Tutors and the National Museum of Natural History. When you put those pictures up, make sure everybody knows, from your social network where you were and what you learned today. But there's more learning to become because you guys have some amazing questions out there. Matt, if we can start with a few, take it all the way back to the beginning of dinosaurs. Some folks wanted to know sort of what caused that mass extinction, if we know, between the Triassic and Jurassic period, and who were those big dominant animals that eventually dinosaurs were able to replace, so those big dominant animals of the Triassic?
That's a great question. So the end of the Triassic actually started to see the beginning of the Atlantic Ocean. So in the Triassic, the world, all the land in the earth is connected in what we call Pangea, and it had begun to separate. And so what is now the Atlantic started to kind of fissure in the middle of this continent. And that was a volcanic event. So you had enormous amounts of volcanic activity, enormous amounts of like flooding lava. So similar to what's going on in many other extinction events, you just have these gases and other things kind of entering the atmosphere that destabilizes not just the air, but the ocean chemistry. And once you kind of get the ball rolling on a mass extinction, it really kind of just keeps going. So once things start to fall apart, they continue to fall apart. You don't have to actually physically kill everything in a mass extinction with, say, the volcano. But the world in the Triassic was full of these really interesting animals. There were a lot of big predatory reptiles running around. So not just phytosaurs, which you can think of as kind of crocodile-like animals, probably living near the water and either catching things in the water or things that come down to drink. But then you had these really big predators that were almost like a trial run for predatory dinosaurs in a way. Things called poposaurs and Rawasuchians. These are animals that might be 10 or 12 feet long, like really sizable predatory animals. Some of them actually could be up on hind legs, so that you might have thought you were looking at a dinosaur at the time. And again, they're very widespread. But they do not make it. And so by the time you get to the Jurassic, these things are just not, they're just not there. And so it's a really big missing piece that gets filled pretty quickly by the big predatory dinosaurs.
That's pretty incredible. It all comes back to the formation of the Atlantic Ocean. So anyone living on the East Coast can maybe look out and say that body of water is why dinosaurs were able to become the dinosaurs we know and love, which brings up another of my favorite questions. You were talking about how it may have been hard for dinosaurs to climb trees. Do we know, could they swim? Could they swim very well? Do we find them anywhere near water? But I think the main question was, could they swim?
It's difficult to test that specifically, right? Other than like throwing a dinosaur in the water and watching it, it's sort of hard to know. But I would say the starting point for these questions, most animals can swim. It's easier to list the animals that can't swim. And especially reptiles in general are pretty good at swimming. So I would say certainly most dinosaurs could swim the way that animals even today that you think couldn't swim can swim. Elephants can swim, horses can swim. Most dinosaurs, I'm sure, could swim. The main difference in how they swim from what you probably think of as a mammal, mammals are our bodies move like in this direction a lot. Most reptiles do side to side. Dinosaurs are more like us, like this. So they probably use their legs to swim rather than swim the way a snake or a crocodile swims. In terms of climbing, again, many animals can climb that you don't think of as climbing animals. Goats can climb trees, for example. So I think, there are a lot of dinosaurs that were small enough and agile enough that probably could climb a tree. We don't see too many dinosaurs that have a specialization for climbing. The way when you look at the skeleton of a monkey, you can kind of recognize that this is a climbing animal. We don't really have an equivalent for a dinosaur. So I would say they're kind of generalists. They can get away doing a lot of things, but they're not specialists in most of those things.
That's really fascinating. I love your thought about listing the animals who can't swim and then kind of carrying that kind of over. That's, paleontologists have to make a lot of inferences that way. So that was great. Maybe another one I favorite about the habits of dinosaurs that a lot of people ask. We got quite a few people watching with their families, watching with, groups of friends. And so we saw the eggs and heard a little bit about how quickly dinosaurs grew. Do we know much about their family structure? Were they social creatures? And like you said, there were thousands and thousands of species. So maybe it changed a little bit, but what do we know about them socially and familially?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting part of dinosaur research is trying to understand that. Back when some of the first baby dinosaurs were being found in the late 1970s, it was a huge deal because they were found in these places where it looked like lots of animals had nested together. And it was a hint that maybe that there was a kind of communal nesting site, that dinosaurs had some sort of sociality. Now, 40 years later, we would say, all the closest relatives of dinosaurs are to some degree social. Alligators and crocodiles are social. Most birds are social, at least a little bit. And they care for the young at least a little bit. Watch the nest, make sure the young get to the water, that sort of thing. So I think we can give dinosaurs that as a very easy baseline. And then the question is, how sophisticated are they as social animals? I think it's probably pretty unlikely that you have something like in Jurassic Park where you have pack hunting dinosaurs that are talking to each other. That's actually a phenomenon that's pretty rare even in mammals. It only appeared probably in the last 5 or 10 million years. But to have dinosaurs that are loosely social in groups, not unreasonable, stay together as family units, perhaps. One thing to keep in mind, though, that as egg-laying animals, dinosaurs are making a whole lot more babies than mammals are. A mammal makes a couple of kids at once, maybe, and takes really good care of them. If a dinosaur loses 10 or 20 babies, it's not that big a deal because there's 10 or 20 more. And then next year, you just make another batch. So there maybe isn't as much need for the kind of investment that we have as mammals, but probably there is at least a little bit of that going on in most dinosaurs.
That's fascinating. I love to, we ask, a quick question and you've got so much nuance to the answer. So everybody, we have a lot of questions about how to become a paleontologist. And I think one of the answers, we'll get to that in a second, maybe just you have to read a lot and think a lot. Couple more quick ones for you before we get to you and being a paleontologist. Some people wanted to know, what is a group of dinosaurs? Is it a pack? Is it a pod or anything like that? And then a larger question is, you listed a lot of dinosaur names for us. How do dinosaurs get their names?
So we don't have a name for a group of dinosaurs, and I invite you to come up with one that we can use. I can't actually imagine that we've overlooked this, but we have. So we don't have a word for that yet. So write it down in the comments. I would like to see that. Dinosaur names are actually kind of a great bit of fun for paleontologists. It's one of the things you really hope to get to do, find a new dinosaur and name it. And it's the discoverer that really gets to do that. And the discoverer may be the person who dug it up, but it may be the person who 20 years later figured out that it was a new species. Whoever kind of crosses that line can come up with the name. There's a lot of traditions in dinosaur naming using saurus, like Tyrannosaurus and Monosaurus. That's one tradition. But honestly, these days, almost anything. And in fact, it's increasingly common to think about where the dinosaur is found. What, maybe something, if you're finding it in a particular country and you're working with people from that country, use something in the language of that country or a story from that country. And that, I think, has become a much more important part of dinosaur names now than it was, say, 100 years ago. But really, it's your creativity that limits you. So there are some pretty interesting dinosaur names out there. And I'm sure we're due for at least 24 more names this year alone.
All right, so there's your challenge, everyone. Discover a new dinosaur and you get to name it. And Matt already gave you another challenge of come up with the definitive name for a group of dinosaurs, which leads to this big question, Matt. How did you become a paleontologist? And for the hundreds, maybe thousands of kids out there who would like to become paleontologists, what could they be doing today in maybe elementary or middle school?
Honestly, I think if if you're in elementary school, middle school, the most important thing is just keep up the interest and curiosity in science. It doesn't actually have to be focused on paleontology. The more you learn about all the different parts of science, the better off you are later if you specialize in something. And then as you get older and you're maybe in high school or you're going to college, you can start to focus on, really you want to focus on geology and biology. Those are the two primary parts of being a paleontologist. Understanding the animals you find or the plants you find, and understanding the rocks that they're found in, which tells you about the environments, for example. Those are the two big pieces. But always it's about asking questions and trying to answer them in a scientific way. That's kind of the thing that drives all scientists. You know, what am I curious about? Like, you know, I want to know, can T-Rex really do this? Can T-Rex bite through bone? How can I formulate that question so that I might be able to actually answer it as a paleontologist? That's the great challenge, I think. And if that kind of thing is really exciting, I would say go for it. That kind of curiosity is the engine of being any scientist. And if it's focused on dinosaurs, then by all means, you know, join the family of paleontologists.
Great advice, and I think all of you know what you need to do, at least the next couple of steps out there. Finally, last question we all have every time we get to talk to a real paleontologist. So this one came up a lot. As a paleontologist who knows every type of dinosaur out there, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Well, I have a disappointing answer, which is I don't have a favorite dinosaur. It's a little bit like having a favorite child. It feels unfair. So I usually bring up a dinosaur that doesn't get a lot of attention as a means of, you know, sort of advertising for the less popular. So today I will bring up Pachycephalosaurus, which I think they're just incredibly interesting dinosaurs, these dome-headed dinosaurs. They're pretty mysterious. We have very few skeletons of these dinosaurs, so we don't understand them really well. They're not that common, so they're hard to find, and they just don't get a lot of attention. So I'm going to bring up Pachycephalosaurus and say, you all should read about that dinosaur. Tyrannosaurus rex does not need my help, so I'm not going to talk about Tyrannosaurus rex. But there's, as I said, thousands of dinosaurs out there and many dinosaurs deserving of your attention that are not always in the news. Go look at those. There's always interesting stories to be learned, interesting things to be learned about those other dinosaurs.
Awesome. And plenty more left to discover. So all of you out there know that even though dinosaurs are, you know, over 66 million years old, there are plenty of new discoveries. A lot of that stuff's happening now, as Matt proved to us today. So thanks so much to all of you out there for such amazing questions and participation. We always love it when the chat is lit up like it was today. Huge thanks to you, Matt, for just some amazing insight, an incredible tour. And I know there's quite a few people behind the camera making this all possible. So thanks to everyone at the National Museum of Natural History and the Smithsonian Institution. And thanks to all of you out there. I think we'll leave you panning out to one of the cooler sites as you get to leave the museum here. And we will have some instructions on where to learn more and where to send those photos in just a bit as well. So huge thanks, everybody.